we have starters on both sides of the ball. But how locked in are some of these players at their positions? We dive into it all coming up next. We continue to say that the New York Football Giants are continuing to get better under Joe Schoen with Brian Daboll. And obviously on the offensive side of the ball, Mike Kafka looms large here. We've done this in years past. How many positions are up for grabs? For today, let's focus on the starters. And on the offensive side of the ball, Daniel Jones, your starter, great. Saquon Barkley's your starter, great. When we get to the wide receiver room, do you look at, we have 3 wide receiver starting positions available. How many of those in this moment right now do you think are written in pen?
I think only one is written in pen right now, Adam, if we're starting 3 wide receivers, and I think it's Isaiah Hodgins. I think Isaiah Hodgins has solidified himself based on what he did when he came over
Not as the
as
number
a
1, but as a starter.
starter on
Right.
this offense. He brings something to the table, his reliability, his route running, everything that he has shown so far to me screams he is worthy of one of 3 starting wide receiver positions. I have him penciled in like unless he gets injured, he is a starter moving forward on this roster.
And then you talk about Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell. I'm just over on ESPN right now talking about who they slot in here on the depth chart. It is Hodgins, Slayton, and Campbell. I think because of experience, because they chose to bring him back, it looks like in the short term, Darius Slayton is the starter. And I think to your point, though, between him and Hodgins, Hodgins is the surging name for the New York Football Giants, whereas Darius Slayton maybe does feel like a little bit of a placeholder and one who ultimately maybe could benefit if he's not the number 2, number 3 on this roster and gets to kind of feast using his speed, his size, and his strength. Do you think who are your guys that you think would overtake? We're using those 3 as the placeholders for now. We're saying Hodgins you feel is locked into a role. I believe in that and agree with you. Who comes in and takes over Slayton, takes over Paris Campbell?
Yeah, so the one thing that I think about is when you talk about the Giants draft, it feels like they are going to give Jalen Hyatt every opportunity to be a starter. He's running with the 2s right now in OTAs with the, obviously you got to work your way into it. But you don't draft a guy as high as the Giants do. You don't trade up for a guy the way the Giants did and plan to have him sit on the shelf. And just remember, obviously Darius Slayton has blazing speed. Jalen Hyatt has blazing speed. Darius Slayton was buried on the depth chart. It looked like he almost could be released before the regular season last year. He has had challenges with drops in his career. Like we
Mm-hmm.
all know, there's a couple of big ones, like the one against the Minnesota Vikings could have cost the Giants in the playoffs, but the defense ended up staying strong. I think based on his arc and progression with the Giants know what they're getting from Darius Slayton. They know it's a commodity that can be capable of contributing. The ceiling is so high on Jalen Hyatt that he has the ability to take a starting roster spot if he comes out and just wows everyone right out of the gate.
I agree that eventually in this season, Jalen Hyatt could be a starter for the Giants. I do not believe that he's going to be a starter coming out the gate here. It doesn't mean it's not possible, right? You're not saying it's a lock, but it's possible. I just don't think so based on, and this is not a knock, the idea of the route tree combinations, right? Just figuring out where he fits into this. The way that it opens up to me for him is if you get injuries in the offseason, right? Obviously, if Paris Campbell, if Sterling Shepard isn't involved in all, Wandale Robinson's not going to be back around. I mean, you take those 3 guys and throw them into an injury barrel, all of a sudden by default, Jalen Hyatt kind of could end up getting elevated there. We know some of the other names that are being mentioned here, but as it stands right now, that tier is Hodgins, Slayton, Campbell, and then it's everybody else, at least at the moment. So I would assume for the season, Jalen Hyatt does not come in as the starter. But to your point, it only takes a couple of bad performances or a couple of breakouts. Remember, even though he was a holdover, Kadarius Toney came in with the new regime, and he had to reset himself and reprove himself. Attitude aside, he had to learn and show that he could be productive in his role, knew the routes, all those things. Jalen Hyatt essentially has the same timeline now as a rookie. So I'll be fascinated to see how he develops. That we'll leave it there on the wide receiver group for the moment. Quickly
I've
on tight ends, because I
I
don't
have
think it really matters here. Darren Waller, he's your starter. He's your X factor in the Kafka offense. And I believe Daniel Bellinger, with his massive arms now, is going to be used in a little more traditional, right? Helping out with the offensive line. We've seen that he's a talented pass catcher as well. I just want to make the note on Lawrence Cager that he is very much kind of like the mold of a Darren Waller in terms of being versatile and movable. I find that fascinating to see how his offseason progresses. Anything on the tight end group before we move to offensive line?
Yeah, obviously, we've seen the pictures of Daniel Bellinger. He's obviously muscled up, working with the strength and conditioning coach, looks chiseled. I
Might be
think
too big.
But well, I think they have a specific plan for how they want to utilize Bellinger. They
Yeah.
want to utilize him in two tight end sets. They want to make
Yep.
sure that he is an exemplary run blocking tight end that has the ability to catch passes out of the backfield. I think as a rookie, he performed admirably in being put in a position where he had to perform. He had to do well. He
Yeah.
took over the starting position right away and he did well. I think what we're realizing with the addition of Darren Waller is he is going to be the primary number one. He is our number one most explosive pass catcher of anyone on the roster. And so they're going to say, Bellinger, you can perform even better next year, just in a different role rather than
Yeah.
being the number one that has to get out of breaks and take guys, middle linebackers one on one. Like you could be the sneaky option that can still be explosive for this team.
Go back and remember that route coming across the line about 5 yards there, turning upfield and getting it in there at the corner pylon on the left side of the end zone, right? Picture that, but with far less congestion for him to have to work against with all these other weapons that the Giants can produce with. Offensive line, my friends. Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, those are your starters. Obviously, they're going to bookend things. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you agree with me that Schmidt is going to be a day one starter. They're still opening the competition up here in OTAs, but there's a reason why you draft a guy that they say is day one plug and play ready. That takes us to the guard positions here, where this is as open as anything. So we talk about up for grabs right now. I think you could make the case at least one wide receiver spot is up for grabs. And then, do you agree both guard spots are an open competition that could go any number of directions?
Yeah, just quickly on the center position, you don't draft a guy in the second round that you think is starter ready and not invest in the center position with anyone that's a natural center. And then, oh, by the way, your
Right.
franchise quarterback then has to do dead ball snaps, which is different than he's done in his entire career because you drafted this guy that likes to snap a ball slightly differently. You don't do all that to say we're doing an open competition
And
here
then we'll see.
at the
And then
center
we'll see how it
position.
goes.
But yeah, I mean, we'll just wait and see. We'll see who wins out in this argument. But yeah, Adam, here's the thing. The Giants have solidified their left tackle, their right tackle, and their center position for the foreseeable future for
Yep.
week one of the regular season. Obviously, we expect to see the progression of Evan Neal. Both guard spots feel literally like it could be a coin flip. And there's probably four, maybe even five guys at this point in time, not the burger place, but the actual five guys that could compete for the starting roster spot. And right now, it looks like Mark Lewinsky, because he makes the most money, is probably your odds on favorite to win right guard. But the way that he played last season, I think Giant fans are begging one of these younger guys to be able to ascend a little bit more and actually take the right guard spot from Mark Lewinsky.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? That's the big spend on free agency by the new regime, by Joe Shane. So I think there's some sense of loyalty. We've talked about this, right? I didn't draft him. I didn't sign him. I don't have to have loyalty. I did sign Glowinski. I did bring him in. So I do have to have loyalty. And then depending on which way you look at it, right? Shane Lemieux comes back from injury last year, looks a little funky. I feel like he's more designated to be this backup interior offensive lineman player. At least that's how I think the organization is going to look at him as a holdover from the previous regime. Remember, fifth round pick. But then Joshua Azudu, I think he's the X factor here for me. My preference is always to go with the younger, to go with the upside. He does, however, have to establish that there's a floor there that you can feel comfortable with. You have Ben Bresson in the mix. He's been surprising for me going back to last year, right? I don't think we had any expectations for him, yet he came in and really played consistent. And that's what you're looking for. As did Glowinski, by the way. I feel like we fall into this category of like knocking him because the money and the expectation. He was fine. I just think that we're not that far away from Mizudu coming in and saying, maybe I can be just fine. And then all of a sudden build off of that over the course of the season. That would be my preference is let's get Mizudu in there. I don't care if it's Bredesen. I don't care if it's Glowinski. I just think one of these young guys is deserving of getting into that rotation.
Well, Look at Shane Lemieux. We've talked about injuries that have, zapped him of the potential of
Yeah.
starting. We saw some mixed bag of things. We were hoping that he was going to be the guy that took the guard position by storm. Adam, it's interesting. You see a lot of videos from training camp of John Michael Schmitz and Shane Lemieux hanging out together. Shane Lemieux cut his hair almost identically to what JMS looks like. It's really
Ooh,
interesting that they're getting close. Could there be some kind of like consistency and continuity and like culture building, dare I say, like across the offensive
my.
line? That's another name just to keep in the back of your mind that Giant fans have wanted to ascend that has struggled with injuries and just inconsistent play.
Flipping it over to the defensive side of the ball, there's some obvious things here. Thibodeau, Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Azeez Ojulari, Adoree Jackson, Xavier McKinney. You can even go a little bit farther and say Deonte Banks is obviously going to be the starter across from Adoree Jackson. We can talk about inside of the linebacker room, I think, with Okereke, I should say, and whether or not who you pair alongside him, as well as the defensive line. One other open competition spot there, too, potentially behind some guys. Not really, if I'm just retooling it here. Is inside linebacker the only spot where there's a real competition here for starters?
No, I disagree. Now, obviously, the middle linebacker position, you have Jared Davis, who was a starter last year, but possibly was a starter because of the injury to Darian Beavers, who
Yeah.
in training camp went down with a terrible injury. It looked like the Giants thought enough of Beavers to be able to say that he could be the starting
Yeah.
linebacker
Yep.
last year. So if he comes back healthy, I do see that being a very serious competition. But Adam, I think we know the left cornerback and the right cornerback are pretty much settled in terms of 1 and 2. The nickel cornerback position is pretty tough. We've talked about Darnay Holmes as kind of the veteran that's in there, but Giant fans have kind of soured on Darnay Holmes a little bit. And we have last year's draft pick, Cordell Flott, who can play both outside and inside. The question is, if the Giants want to get their three best corners on the field all at once, it could make sense to have Cordell Flott be playing the nickel position, maybe not necessarily Darnay Holmes.
Sorry, Andrew. Let me clarify. Yeah, I don't view Darnay Holmes as being in the competition to be a starter for this roster,
Wow.
right? Because you
Wow.
go back to last season. Last year was his opportunity, and he came in and just did not look capable. There's a reason why Wink Martindale decided I'm going to throw everything at the wall here throughout the course of this season, looking for someone that's going to be able to help this defense and be consistent and productive. Now, we know Wink Martindale is going to do a lot of different looks, so there's going to be a lot of shuffling when it comes to some of these roles and how they get used. But Cordell Flott, again, I'll go back to the well on this. Darnay Holmes, holdover from previous regime. Cordell Flott, drafted by this regime and drafted to be that lean slot corner, nickel cornerback option for the New York Football Giants. I assume, I hope, I expect that Cordell Flott is going to claim that role this offseason. So even if Darnay Holmes looks like he can still be productive. And I'm not even knocking his ability to be a member of this defensive core. I think there's value to his game and value to him being on this roster. But Cordell Flott, year number 2. I want him to claim this role, and I'm expecting him to claim that role.
Yeah, I pardon me. I thought that it was up for debate. Some websites even have Darnay Holmes listed as the depth chart starter right now
This
at
was
the nickel
wrong.
position, which
Yeah.
which makes it a little bit controversial. But I agree with you. I think it's Cordell Flott's to lose. The one other position I will say, Adam, that I think is still up for debate is the safety position alongside Xavier McKinney. Most
Sure.
people think it's going to be Jason Pinnock. I think he performed pretty well given the circumstances last year, only graded out to a 61.3 pro football focus grade. But with a full offseason and maybe not a collarbone injury, could it be Dane Belton's time to shine? Could he end up, leapfrogging Jason Pinnock to be alongside Xavier McKinney? I think with a full offseason of training, that is a real legitimate possibility.
Yeah, and by the way, and I agree with you on that one too. And Dane Belton is somebody that we fell in love with instantly, and we're rooting for. And that injury was quite disappointing for us as a podcast because we wanted to be able to champion his rise over the course of his rookie season. That being said, though, you did mention the linebacking core. I will just say, I think the more interesting thing there, we're going to talk about depth battles, but we mentioned, Darian Beavers, if healthy, I think he's the guy you want to plug in alongside Bobby there. You mentioned Davis as well. There was consistency. Just fun to kind of watch what happens with a Micah McFadden who played a lot this past season when he's forced into that action. Carter Coughlin still lingering around this roster. Like, I think you're going to see a lot of shuffling here, and whether or not it ever rises to the level of like starter battle, there's going to be something going on here. There's going to be fringe guys there that are trying to knock on the door of saying, I'm deserving of maybe being in this starting rotation. And whether or not Wink Martindale and the Giants say, maybe you are, or you just hope that the cream rises to the top here and there's far less discussions. Because right now, Andy, and you can close this out, we just did the list, right? So a safety position, a linebacker, maybe, but I'm not even going to list it there. Like, you want to throw in the slot corner, you want to throw in that battle with Darnay Holmes? Two position battles on defense, three position starter battles on offense. There's maybe only 4 or 5 spots up for grab here for the New York Football Giants from a starter perspective. And we're saying that in a good way because there is talent as opposed to years past when it was by default, this is your starter.
And as you mentioned, at the end of the day, Adam,
Yeah, bud.
the simple thing is we're arguing over these positions, but look at the talent that you're talking about in these spots. Like
Yeah.
last year, we had John Feliciano at center, but did we feel good about it? Was it great? There were still question marks on the left guard and the right guard at that point. We didn't know what was going to happen. And the cornerback position, after releasing James Bradbury, was a big question mark of who has to step up. Even inside linebacker with Darren Beavers going down,
Yep.
is like, is Carter Coughlin going to be our inside linebacking starter? Think about the depth the Giants have been able to create without mortgaging the future with these massive contracts having to be given out. The Giants are in a much better spot depth-wise with only a handful of question marks where, hey, if one or two of these guys starts to flash, the Giants really have something, especially in the secondary as well as the offensive line.
Yeah, and when we come back in, I think across this offseason, the question's going to become, what's the percentage that a Darian Beavers, healthy, in the system, claims that role, right? How confident are we in the starters that are at these positions? Because it is a nice combination of veteran experienced guys and then some real young talent that we're excited about. So you go ahead, and you subscribe over on YouTube. You get the podcast where we get those needs fulfilled as we'll be breaking down this offseason and some of these position battles as they unfold. The depth of this roster is equally as exciting as we try to fill out how Big Blue will look in the upcoming season. Until next time, though, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand you, the people, know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.